All right. Okay. All right, we just approved the minutes. Sorry, we've got a little audio issue here. So there was no public comment offered, and we just approved the minutes. Item 3. We'll move on to item 4, the topic of discussion for today. We just have one and only Kirk Stoner, Director of Planning. He's going to discuss the growth trend. There's a growth trends update for the county. So over to you, sir.
All right, thanks, Gary. Actually, I'll turn it over to Stacy. The last meeting we wanted to give a little more background on some of the presentations we're making. So, Stacy, if you want to take it.
Thanks, Kirk. So, commissioners, I know that we've discussed this, but I thought it was maybe a good opportunity, and Kirk suggested it, and so that, of course, makes it a great idea to kind of go back over the meeting that you saw and the meetings that are coming up. So, as you remember, 2 weeks ago, we had the CLR presentation. Now, Kirk is here with us to discuss growth trends. In another 4 weeks, we have the fall FAC presentation. And you'll notice that you see a lot more people in the room today. You saw more people in the room at the last meeting, and you'll certainly see these same cast of characters whenever the FAC rolls around. This has been the group that has been tasked with putting together a more cohesive presentation of all 4 of these presentations to ensure that we're discussing some of the key factors. And we're also pointing out maybe where those factors are interpreted differently, so that there is certainly a more robust effort to understand at any moment the health of the economy and the health of the county. So we are, again, looking at these presentations, but we're also working on a dashboard so that you don't have to wait for these presentations to see some of the key indicators that are influencing the county and certainly the health of our general fund. Thanks, Kirk.
Okay. With that, then we started to talk about our growth trends update. What's up? There it is. All right, so what we want to talk about today was looking at what type of growth was proposed or completed in the county in 2021. And we'll take a little look at 2022 and beyond. And then related to what Stacy just said too, then we'll take a look at how this really affects the county's financial position, associated services. So I think in the past, when I've updated the board on growth trends, it's been more just kind of a data dump of this is what we're seeing. We want to put it in the context then of our financial position, associated services. So a couple definitions here for everyone to understand. This gives us an insight into where all of our data is coming from. So the first is proposed development. So when we talk about proposed development today, we're talking about development that was shown on final subdivision and land development plans submitted to the county planning for review. So all development plans, subdivision, land development plans in the county are required to be reviewed by the county planning commission before they're recorded. So we get a glimpse then of what's coming forward in terms of growth that we'll see in the future. So that's proposed development. Then we have pipeline development. So that is new development that has been proposed. It's received a building permit from the municipality, but construction has not been completed, nor have the improvements been assessed and added to the tax rolls. So it's under construction, it's out there, it's not done yet, but we'll see that in the future be completed and then eventually added to the tax rolls. Completed development then is new development, which a building permit has been issued, construction is completed and added to the tax rolls. So there's 3 different levels there of development that we're looking at today. How's it look from a procedural standpoint? So here, the final plans are submitted, the building permit is issued. Building permits are sent to the tax assessment office too. So that's where we have some good data on what's happening in the county. When construction is completed, then county tax assessors know that through their canvassing efforts. They'll go out, take a look at the improvements, assess them, and then we can see that those new land and building values ultimately hit our county tax roll. So given that we're heavily dependent upon real estate tax revenue, we can take a look at these numbers here and the proposed pipeline and completed development to help us figure out where we're at financially. So we'll start with proposed development. And this is what we've seen in our subdivision land development plans. I have a link to this map later in the presentation. All these dots are subdivision land development plans that were issued in Cumberland County in 2021. So some of them may be pretty minor, others may be more major. The color of the dots, if you wouldn't mess around with this, yellow is residential, red's commercial, purple's industrial, then like the light blue is public, brown is agriculture. But we keep this map up. It's up on our website on a regular basis. You can track what's going on at any given time. You can do searches to look at historical records too. So what happened in 2021 with proposed residential development? We saw 1,695 total units were proposed. Most of those units came from major projects in South Middleton Township, East Pennsboro Township. So about half those units were really from 2 municipalities. But when you look at totality of it, 5 municipalities accounted for all but 365 of those units. So as we go through this, you'll see that our growth is really concentrated east of Carlisle for the most part, residential as well as non-residential. I think the big takeaway here, though, is multifamily development. So 5 out of the past 6 years, we have seen multifamily proposed development of 800 plus units each year. So you look at that, you know, 5 of the past 6 years, we're over 4,000 units of multifamily that have been proposed. So prior to that, it was largely single family detached. So we're seeing a transition of the housing stock in the county. So we see that trend continuing. We look at non-residential development, what's been proposed for that. We had 45 commercial units that were proposed, about 800,000 square feet of floor area. And we say commercial units, we include industrial in that. Some notable projects, we're all aware of Penn State Health or Hampton Medical Center. So there was a phase of that was out there. The Burke Center is also a medical facility that was in Hampton Township. And then a new poultry facility, which is in Monroe Township. So we see that we're getting across the board. We have some ag, we have some of the commercial growth. I would call attention to the Shippensburg area. I think that area is really poised for growth. We have a casino that will be coming in. Some of these projects that we're seeing here are kind of pre-proposal at this point, that they really haven't been proposed, but we're aware of them. Convenience stores, a car wash. So I think when you see that casino there, you see available land, you see that it'll induce more development in the Shippensburg area. Look at pipeline development then. In terms of residential pipeline development, again, these are projects that are under construction, not yet completed. We have 793 open residential building permits for new construction. So this is as of August, and these things keep coming in. So we had to take a snapshot in time. So we took August, work with Wes's office to pull some of this data. I can see about $200 million worth of construction value. So when we talk about construction value, that's simply the cost of construction. We had the discussion last time. It's not the cost of the land, it's simply the value of the construction. So as we move ahead and you see that completed, those values would be assessed and would be different than the 200 million that we're looking at here. Projects, they range from everywhere from $10,000 mobile homes up to $2.2 million single family detached homes. So there's quite a spread that we're seeing there with pipeline residential development. We look at pipeline non-residential development, 74 open commercial building permits for new construction. Again, an estimated construction value of about $232 million. And if you look at some of the projects here, these are just notable projects that were pulled out of larger value. You see warehouses. You'll see apartment complexes. Why that's on here is that for assessment purposes, apartment complexes are considered commercial. So that's something we work with Wes's office when we're doing kind of a count of units of residential units. We're pulling out for residential. We're looking at some of the pipeline development. We're including apartments as commercial development. So it's just how differences in how we define them in planning versus assessment when they're looking at how they're considering this commercial.
So what constitutes a complex? How many apartments? How many square feet? How's that determined?
Wes, from your definition, what?
Four apartments or more is considered commercial.
4 apartments or more. And like in Canterbury, they divide up the houses, try to squeeze 4 into a space for 2.
Right.
But that's assessed differently.
Correct.
Thank you.
I think when you look at the notable projects too, so you see warehouses, there's 3 of those, and you also see the personal care homes, the medical office building. They also correspond really well to some of our core industries in the county from an employment perspective. So when you look at it, we're seeing the employment benefits of some of those uses. Then we're also seeing, especially from our side, the real estate tax benefits of those developments. So they're real. I mean, you look at the warehouses, 3 of those, $83 million of construction value. If you look at what we have on the books now, some of those warehouses are the highest. Some of them are higher. Some of the highest assessed properties in the county. So $40–50 million worth of assessed value. They're big business for us, as well as the medical buildings too. So I think there's a nice correlation there that when we see some of the industries that we know are here that are continuing to grow, we see the benefits then on the real estate tax side for us. Completed development. So just a quick note on completed development. In the past, what the county planning department would do, we would do a survey of all of our municipalities and ask them to send us back all their building permit information. It took about 2.5, 3 months. It took a long time of badgering some municipalities to get the information we needed. We started working with Wes and his team and figured out, well, hey, if the county tax assessment office has all the building permit information, we may not need to do our look to the municipalities for this survey. So this year was the first year where we worked with the tax assessment office to get the building permit information from them back to us instead of doing a building permit survey. We still did one just in case something went awry and for comparison purposes. But what we focused on this year was working with Wes's office to identify all the completed building permits in the county. And by doing it with Wes and his team, then we could also put some values on it. Some of the municipalities would give us a number, not always the value. So I think we have better data this year. And I think the data is a little more focused because it does give us that value on those permits as well, not just a number. So when we look at completed residential development, you can see kind of the different types of development over here. And you'll see a flip here. If you recall, we were looking at multifamily being the predominant proposed development. Now we look at completed development, it flips back to single family detached. So I think what we're seeing here is the build out of several years of higher proposals of single family homes over the years. And also with multifamily, when you're looking at a complex, Gary, as you mentioned, some of those complexes are large and it's going to take time for them to be built. Take a lot more cash to get completed as opposed to a single family residence. So I think over time, what we'll see is this completed development, we'll start to see that sway more towards the multifamily as those 4,000 plus units get built out over the next several years.
What happens, I think you touched on this, but what happens in those instances? No, so we are comparing our data to what the municipalities have. We're still doing that? Because the reason I ask is we always had a problem, I know, in the borough of houses that were being carved up into complexes. But the borough didn't know anything about it. And some folks will try to hide that.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me if we're comparing notes, we should be able to help catch that in our effort to determine what's complex and how it's assessed. Yes? No?
Yeah. We need a building permit. So if there's a building permit issued, we see that with Wes's office. If there's no building permit issued, for instance, by the borough, they're not seeing it and we're likely not seeing it.
Okay.
Through discovery, we do find that, then we contact municipality. Someone goes and gets a building permit.
Oh, right. Okay. That's the kind of information sharing I'm looking for. So some of the municipalities don't necessarily have the resources to do the codes enforcement to the level that would really be ensure compliance.
We're hopeful too, Gary, as we continue to work with the assessment office that as we're sharing data back and forth, they see that we're keeping these records as important, imperative for them that they get the building permits and to get them in a timely basis to the assessment office. So we have good records here.
Okay, thanks.
So for residential development that was completed, 989 permits. That was about average when you look over the last 11 or so years. We were averaging about 970 per year, so a little higher than average. Those municipalities, Silver Spring, Hampton, Upper Island, Southampton, South Middleton, account for 72% of the units. If you look historically over the last several years, they're carrying the lion's share of residential development in the county. As we're all aware, it shouldn't really come as a surprise. And the last point there, the single family detached homes leading the building permit totals for the 5 last years. Again, that's that trend we're seeing. They're being built out, but I think we'll probably see a switch here in the future. We'll see more of the multifamily being built out. On the non-residential side, completed development saw 29 completed permits. Silver Spring and Lower Island had the most completed building permits. Some of the notable projects there, again, the Hampton Townships, hotels, Porsche dealership, Silver Spring Township. Of course, you see that built out there on the Carlisle Pike, and then Sheets convenience stores. Convenience stores right now are really hot in the county. So we know Wawa is looking in Western Cumberland County, Eastern Cumberland County. They have a store. Sheets. There's a Rudders that's proposed at exit 37, almost within sight of another Rudders. So yeah, there's a lot of convenience stores, hotels as well. I think car washes too, right, Wes? We're seeing a lot of car wash activity.
6 permits in the last year.
So you look, so it gets back to a lot of times we see the development that's occurring, that it's occurring, and from our standpoint, it has a benefit from a real estate tax revenue, right? We go out and we assess it. But sometimes then we look back at the quality of development. Is it quality employer? Is it some of these not so much? So I think that, trying to work with our municipalities, good planning, good business development with our economic development agency, so that folks that are looking to the area know we have land available, know we have a good place to do business, so that if there's competition for some of these prime commercial or industrial sites, that in some cases we may land something else versus maybe another convenience store or furniture bank. Just some trend information, and this really gives you for the last 11 years what's been going on. This is the residential trends. You can see kind of the ups and downs from the proposal standpoint with the red line there. Whenever you see high years like 2016, it takes some time to build those out and see those proposed units actually be into constructed permits, where there's a building permit issue, and be reflected then in the blue line. And in some cases, it may not happen. So if you look back to 2004, 2005, kind of the peak of the residential real estate bubble, there's some projects that we're aware of out there that were proposed that never happened. We would have shown them here as proposed residential units, never saw a building permit issue for them. Some that have been reused as other uses too. So I think this gives you a look and says, okay, what can we expect in the future here with the proposed residential units? We see there's a healthy backlog. It's just a matter of how they translate that into building permits. Just some fun facts. Since 2000, our highest year of proposals was 3,182. That was in 2005. So it's back right at the peak. For permits, that was 1,695 actually. That's incorrect. So I'm sorry. The second highest year on record was, I'm sorry, so for proposed building permits, building permits, the highest year on record was 1,648. That was in 2002. So you can see we're at 989 in 2021. So you can see kind of the highs and lows of it. Lows for proposals, 502 back in 2012 was the lowest we have here for quite some time. And then for building permits, 745 in 2011. The lowest. So you can see kind of the ups and downs of the residential cycle here. If we look at non-residential trends, the 11th hour is going to pull this slide out. We'll leave it in here for this year. It may not be here next year. I talked about the new way we were getting data with municipalities, building permit survey versus working with Wes and his team. I think if you look back, so you look back there, you see like 14, 15, 16, 17, building permits were higher than proposals for non-residential use. The reason for that was we were doing municipal building permit surveys at the time, and they were providing us building permit numbers for redevelopment projects and kind of reuse in, especially like Carlisle Borough, Mechanicsburg Borough. So it really wasn't a new commercial or industrial unit, I think, like we're looking for as part of this. So it was a reuse, and it's great to see that, but it wasn't a new facility that's being developed that would add to our tax rolls. So what we're looking at moving ahead is really just tracking those new units, new construction that's happening out there. So you can see here kind of a flip-flop, and we're seeing more proposals than permits, which is typically the way this should be happening. You can't be building something that hasn't been proposed. So that's what we'll track as we move ahead. I think we can continue to track. We'll probably lop off some of that past data just because it's not quite an apples to apples comparison. So what's it all mean? The important part of what we're looking at. So we look at 2021, we had a total of about $470 million added to the tax base from completed projects. So this gets back, Wes made his presentation a week or two ago. It's kind of what he captured. See there the split between residential and commercial properties. And again, commercial does include apartments. If we look at pipeline development, right now we have about $427 million worth of projects, again, construction costs only in the pipeline. So our pipeline is healthy, but what we have to look at is how that is built out then over time. This isn't going to be all built out in 2023. Some of these permits take 2-3 years to complete. So there's going to be a lag between when we see these pipeline projects actually hit the tax rolls. And then just a quick view of through this year, through July, I believe we have some data from Western Europe, 185 million in completed projects just through July of this year. And then for proposals too, we're kind of looking good this year. We're at about 1,000 residential units and then 28 commercial and industrial. So kind of a little preview of what we're looking at for projects in the pipeline here. So proposed development, as I mentioned, the proposed residential and commercial units we build out over the coming years added to our tax base, but it will take time and there could be changes. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. When we look at the residential side, we could add as many as 4,000 new residents. So if you take that 1,695 residential units, average household size of 2.36 people per household, generates about 4,000 new residents for us, which is really a 1% population growth. So again, we're not going to see that all at one time, but it gives us a preview of these all are indeed new residents from outside the area. There's going to be some population growth that we see. And it's interesting when you look at that 1% population growth, that's really about the rate we've been growing for the past several decades. So, recently that's been fast as others have slowed down a little bit. That's fast, and we're kind of leading the state in terms of growth, but it's really consistent. We've been seeing that consistent about 1% per year, and it's backed up by the number of residential units that are being proposed each year. Non-residential development, I think, is a little tougher to predict. I think it follows the residential growth. So if you look at in the county, back, I remember in the day we couldn't attract a Starbucks. Now Starbucks is everywhere. We just got our first Trader Joe's. Businesses like that don't just come to any area. I mean, they're looking at the demographics of an area, and they're looking at an area where they have the density and the socioeconomics that they're looking for. So I think that's showing that while our county is growing, it'll continue to do so. We'll probably attract more non-residential development to provide the services for a growing population. But it's very difficult to predict, how fast that will occur and exactly when. Our development's going to occur Carlisle and East, and then Southampton Township and Shippensburg. So if you look, we often say Cumberland County is the fastest growing. I think a lot of times when you talk about balance, which is often the discussion that we have, how we balance, our county really is balanced almost. From a geography standpoint, the eastern part is developed, the western part has one hub, but there's a lot of open space and a lot of conservation areas in the west. So I think we have that balance built in. Moving ahead, I think we need to keep a keen eye on that to make sure that we maintain that in the future. From a county service standpoint, I think this also points to the fact that as we see new residents come in, there's also needs for county services. We talk county services, what we do here, with our human services and our courts and other type offerings we have here. More people mean more demand for those services. Some overall trends to track that I think are important. Recession, how's that going to curb consumer spending? And so if we see the consumers start to spend less, how does that impact the businesses that are here? How does that impact the businesses that want to come here? Our housing market, could it be cooled by higher interest rates? Already we're seeing with the county, our average house price, our house sale price right now is $300,000. We just got data from the Realtors Association yesterday. We're still seeing the days on market's very low. We're still seeing really high competition for our market. If we see interest rates creeping up, we see a potential recession. How does that impact the housing market? It could cool it. If it cools it, what we're going to see, maybe some of those pipeline projects don't get completed. Maybe some of those proposals that are out there don't actually translate into building permits and they don't get built. I think we've all learned supply chain issues and geopolitical concerns really can drive material and energy prices higher, which affect consumer spending as well. Employment's another area that I think we've seen and we have to keep an eye on that. When we look, especially from commercial industrial side, we need good folks here to work. And we already have a low unemployment rate. New employees are very tough to find. If we have employment struggles, a business that are looking to locate here, does that impact their viability? They're here and maybe look somewhere else, which then has an impact on us in terms of new development and the impact on the general fund. And the final piece here, the incompatible development, we always have to end with the planning stuff. So we'll plan with the planning stuff. Then incompatible development patterns could create negative quality of life. So I think we're doing a pretty good job working with our municipal partners to figure out what makes Cumberland County, what makes each of our municipalities special. how do we preserve that to make sure that we can enjoy the quality of growth without threatening some of the quality of life that's really necessary to attracting that growth. More information, I put this in here. You have the electronic version. I'm sure you, this weekend, everyone will search this on their free time. We have the annual reports. You can look back several years to look at those and see what the data looks like. And then the subdivision and land development activity map has all the current information on what plans are happening in the county. And you can actually click on those and see the actual plan if you want to look at those. I'll leave it at that and answer any questions the board may have.
I realize some of this, what I'm going to ask you, maybe will be on the link or whatever, but I think we would know some things that just off the top of my head, maybe like, do we know how many acres, for instance, are being converted to commercial use or residential use? You know, what's the loss of the open space and what's it going for? Warehouses are a particular concern. What's the total square footage of warehouse space, for instance? And break that down into classes because some of the whole stuff's kind of functionally obsolete. But I think, you know, the things we hear about on our end is front facing the public are those issues, and it would be helpful to know whether what is perceived as the problem is really the problem.
Yeah, we have a database that backs up that map, Gary. We have tons of information. We can go and look at the acreage of the projects and figure out that. We used to track open space, and we stopped doing that because it really started to be a complicated calculation. So if you have a warehouse that we develop, you may have a certain amount of square feet that's developed, but everything else around, is that open space or is that developed? And it started getting this extensive manual calculation that Jeff Kelly used to do. He's the only one who knew how to do it. So we've kind of moved away from that, but we could tell you, like, when you look at how many acres are developed, we absolutely have that.
Well, even in terms of acreage that is converted in zoning to accommodate, say, a warehouse. So that would be a meaningful piece of information.
I think when you look at the pace of development, is the county developing rapidly? I think it is. I mean, but when you compare it to other areas in the southeast of Pennsylvania, other large metro areas, it's not. I don't think it's that fast.
We're fastest growing, but that of course is one way of measuring, absolute relative versus. So what does it mean to be fastest growing? I think that's where some people struggle with the perception of what is too much.
Yeah. I think with our growth too, we didn't do, we can give you, if the board's interested at some point, the census brief. I think we've set up a document on that. We do see that we're growing, but the one thing that I think is interesting too, I think we're growing more diverse as a county. And I think that's something for us to embrace. When you look at, we have a lot of new people coming to the county and broadening out our demographics, which brings a lot of rich culture to the area, a lot of new experiences, a lot of new skills when we look at our workforce. So that's one area where when you look at growth, is growth good? We can talk about the numbers, but growth is good in a lot of other respects.
Kirk, it's more of a technical question, and I think I know the answer to it. When you notate completed development residential as an example, it could be a plan that's approved for 100 units, 100 homes. If 80 of them are complete, that's considered completed development.
Now, what we're showing on there for completed development will be the number of units. So when a unit is completed, it's considered complete. So it may be an apartment complex, 100 unit building, maybe only 80 of those are completed. We're counting those 80, not the full 100.
Right, the 80 is complete.
Correct.
The 20 would still be in pipeline.
Correct.
Got it. Yeah, right. And this might be a little bit off the presentation, but is it a true statement that most warehouses are located close to an interstate?
Well, it would be one's definition of close. Yeah,
I think within a mile or two.
Most, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think what we are seeing in a trend that they're starting to spread. They're starting to, as the land around the interchanges are being filled up, starting to see like what's the next available land. Rezoning requests for that. So US 11, PA 174, they're all kind of corridors where you're seeing some of those requests.
Because the hemp farm soon will have well over 2 million square feet of warehousing, and it's at least 4 miles from 81.
The state of New Jersey just has some statewide look at the kind of warehousing distribution. They're faced with a lot of the same problems that we have of trying to accommodate in the right area. So they put out some statewide guidelines, and some of them get back to the size of the warehouse should be correlated to how close it is to the interchange. Now, that's their guidelines, but they have this, the further you get away, the smaller they would get. I'm not sure where that'll go out there, but it's just interesting to see how other states are looking at the problem and trying to address it.
I can't follow that one. What's the logic?
It's saying, well, if you have like a 2 million square feet distribution center, it should be right at the interchange. And then the further out you get, you may have maybe a UPS or Amazon hub that's a couple 100,000 square feet that doesn't have the truck traffic, maybe van traffic, would be okay 10, 12 miles away.
But they're still generating tons and tons of traffic, depends on the nature of it. Which brings me to the one question I had, which is the siting of it near proximity to highway is very important, of course, but it seems the concern I hear around here is not so much where they're located, but the fact that they are located in roadways are not capable of accommodating the increased truck traffic and the size of the vehicles, the damage to the roads, but more the blocking of a single lane road. And Trindle's a good example of how more and more trucks on Trindle. That's a major east-west throughway short of the interstate, which we're trying to encourage people not to use the interstate for local travel. So is there any metric or anything that discusses how a municipality might want to address the road concern that comes with that site that they're approving?
Right. Yeah. So unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, we look at off-site improvements. For a development, you can't require off-site improvements unless it's turning lanes, signals.
Do it all the time.
I know. I'm giving the politically correct version. It doesn't happen. Yeah, absolutely, it happens. So a municipality, if it's its own roadway, has some control over that. When you look at a lot of the state highways where some of the bigger ones are at, there's a process, and actually the county planning department's involved in that. When there's new transportation impact studies, we're invited into the process to review this. So this is something that's just happened over the past couple of years where we've been more engaged in that. I think the problem that we see is it's project by project, and sometimes the cumulative impacts of multiple projects is tough to determine. And then a lot of it is based upon congestion and not safety. So for instance, on I-81, we've made comments on some warehouse projects at exit 37, exit 29. The ramps and the interchange configuration is really where a lot of the problems come from a safety standpoint. But they're looking at it more from a level of service of congestion.
Aren't the two linked?
They are, yes, absolutely. So we've said, hey, like if there's a safety problem, that's going to result in congestion. And if it is congested, it could relate to the safety problem. So we've been trying to make that point more and more with PennDOT and get them to think about that during the TIS process, so that if a developer's coming in, they're doing more studies on the ramps to see if the ramp lengths are adequate, if the weaving areas are adequate. And that's our whole problem with I-81 in Cumberland County.
Is the ramps.
Yeah, and the ramps and the interchange configurations and interchange spacing. They're too close together and they don't have adequate merge areas.
That's kind of everywhere across South Central, maybe even broader, but I know York County has an enormous problem with the ramps being insufficient for 83.
Sure. And then when you look to like just access of I-81 too, you look at all the exits, we have 29, 37, 44, 47, 48, 49, 52, all just for Carlisle. That's a lot of access for a limited access highway, which creates a lot of our speed differentials and weaving problems on it. So when you look at like say an exit 37, we had a TIS recently came through there for a project. It's not a huge project, 500,000 square feet. I forget what the exact number is, but that traffic added to what's out there now, it incrementally gets worse. And we're not going to see any major fixes to exit 37 anytime soon. So we can look at it and say, yeah, from a congestion standpoint, it works. And we're saying, hey, from a safety standpoint, is there anything else we should be doing or thinking ahead? I think sometimes PennDOT looks at, well, it's not exactly what they're charged to look at. And then from a cost perspective, can you ask one developer to bear the burden of doing major safety improvements when the metric really is congestion?
And that brings me to the other question I have, which is the bridges that are over 81, the ramps take you. At least a handful of those are probably insufficient to support any large scale commercial development. We had that issue down at Southampton.
Yeah.
Years ago, and it's simply the overpass couldn't, a huge plot there, through parcels, various parcels connected, just waiting to go.
Yeah, so that actually, Gary, too, is timely with exit 29. There's a prospect that was looking at potentially expanding through the TIS process. They were willing to potentially put in some private funds to make a major overhaul of the interchange. You know, if there were concessions made, some land use concessions, whatnot. But without that, there's still limits on what they would have to do. Well, if they only have to add a lane or some turn lanes, they can do just that and be done. The next guy in them is left with maybe a major expansion. Until that guy comes.
But in terms of the bridges themselves, and we were told at the time that the governor has a discretionary pot of money for exactly that purpose, to bring those bridges up to standard for economic development purposes. So we had no, Corbett was governor, we had absolutely no luck.
We were missed in that discussion, I guess.
You what?
We were missed in that discussion if you had money for the bridges, but yeah, exit 29 is a perfect example. Yeah, it's at its breaking point. So somebody's going to have to come in and make a widening if it's going to unlock some of the other opportunities that could be had down there.
That's the one Tom Kinnick was part of. We were all down.
Yes, that was a while ago, but it is still. I mean,
It's the exact same.
And TIS, we just a couple weeks ago, we just submitted more comments on the TIS for prospect.
Additional questions for Kirk?
Thank you. Good,
Thanks, Kirk.
good info.
I did have one for Wes, but I can't remember. Oh, I know what it was real quick. The Kirk mentioned earlier on about the improvements to the land versus the land value itself. So the thing I recall most from the eons ago when we did the last reassessment was how many public complaints we got regarding how that was split out and that it was apparently different than what people were used to. So could you, in a nutshell, tell me when we do that assessment process, how do we arrive at the split between land and improvements?
It all depends on the neighborhood that you're in, what percentage you use and what it's used for, whether it's, for residential or for commercial, industrial. And so in industrial sites, we may have $180,000 on it for our industrial site. And it sells for 5.6 million, it doesn't matter. And once they improve that site, we may add another 100,000 to that 380,000. So it's not a large improvement. And you would think it would be more, but in 2010, that's the assessment it was. And so we leave the property the way it is until they activate the permit.
Right.
And then we change it to whatever uses.
I think the situation we encountered was on existing residential is where we probably heard about it, where people said it used to be split this way. Now it's like over-ended. I think the greater emphasis, where do we put the greater emphasis now on the home or on the land?
I mean, rule of thumb is 80-20, 20% land ratio to building.
Okay.
Especially residential.
All right. That's rule of thumb. Is that what we're doing?
When you look at it, you see it quite a bit, but there's some neighborhoods where it could be as high as 30% of land to building ratio.
So it really does depend on
the area. Community area.
All right. Sure, we'll run into that again. All right. If there's no other questions, I guess that brings us to other business. Yeah, so number 5 is other business. Anything else to come before the board of commissioners? Stiff down. Nothing. Okay, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Adjourn.
We stand adjourned then.